Transportation has changed a lot throughout history, and in today's time, one of the main ways to move around is by car. But back then, people either walked or they traveled by horse. So in 1886, Carl Benz said, "Hold your horses," and he came up with an idea that would revolutionize transportation. So to understand how we went from horses to cars, we need to understand the term horsepower. So horsepower is a unit of measurement that measures how much work is done by something relative to an amount of horses. This may sound confusing, so here's an example. A car has 400 horsepower, so this car does the same amount of work as 400 horses. This explains that the reason we changed from horses to cars is because of efficiency, which led to the revolution of transportation. A little information on how this video will go. So we will be going through every decade from the 1880s up to the 2020s, seeing the most popular car from every decade and seeing how cars have evolved throughout time. Now that we understand this, let's get into the evolution of cars. Starting off with what's considered the first car, we have the Benz patent motor wagon, and this car runs on an internal combustion engine that had approximately 0.75 horsepower, so this first car was not as efficient as a horse. Something to note out of this car is that it has 3 wheels and it doesn't have any type of doors. All cars on this list are powered by internal combustion engines, but they are all made up of different configurations. For example, the Benz patent motor wagon has an internal combustion engine that is a single-cylinder, 4-stroke engine fueled by gasoline. Now on to the 1890s, we have the Benz Velo, one of the earliest cars, also produced by Carl Benz. Now with the Benz Velo, we can see this car has 4 wheels, and this car also has a single-cylinder internal combustion engine, just like the previous car. Now this car approximately has 1 to 3 horsepower. It's a small little upgrade, just like Chopper's Bounties. The Benz Velo has a similar structure to the Benz patent motor wagon, however this one looks more supported and it appears to be safer. However, this car still doesn't have doors. Now onto the 1900s, we have the Ford Model T, and fun fact, the Ford Model T was the most popular car for 2 decades, so this is going to cover both 1900s and the 1910s. The Ford Model T was introduced in 1908, and this car revolutionized the automobile industry with its affordability and mass production techniques that it dominated the market for 2 entire decades. This alone makes the Ford Model T one of the most popular cars of all time. So for the 1900s, the Ford Model T has about 20 horsepower, and in the 1910s, it upgrades up to 22 horsepower. The Ford Model T has a different design from the previous cars since it's fully closed and has doors now. Man, does it take 2 decades for people to say, wouldn't it be nice if cars had doors? I swear, I have seen this guy in the Cars movie before. The last thing about the Ford Model T is that it has a 4-cylinder internal combustion engine that is powered by gasoline. And now, let's move on to the next decade. Okay, so the 1920s have a very creative car, the Ford Model A. Yes, they just switched a letter. The design of these 2 vehicles is very similar. I feel like they just said, hey, the success on the Ford Model T was really good. Let's just add up on that. Hey man, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So there are a little bit of improvements on the design, but where the real improvements are is the performance. The Ford Model A has the same engine as the Ford Model T, but this engine must have been on a bulk for a decade in order to increase that horsepower from 22 in the 1910s all the way up to 40 to 45 in the next decade. A little fun fact about the gasoline is that before the 1920s, gasoline was a byproduct of the refining process for kerosene until people realized we're like, hey, we have a lot of cars now, so maybe gasoline is valuable. This leads to the introduction of leaded gasoline in the 1920s. A little side note, there probably was other fuel sources before, like in between these two, but these weren't as impactful as leaded gasoline. Now going to the 1930s, we have the Chevrolet Series AD Universal. The design seems to be heavily inspired from the Ford Model A and the Ford Model T, so it was like one of those like copy my homework but don't make it that obvious type of situations. Now this car has a 6-cylinder internal combustion engine, which is a power-up from the previous cars. This car has about 50 to 60 horsepower and is known for its sleek design and advanced engineering, causing it to be the most popular car of the 1930s. Getting into the 1940s, we have the Jeep Willys MB, and this car was produced during World War II. Willys MB became a symbol of American ingenuity and durability. Whenever you were little and got toy soldiers, they probably came with a car, and that car was the Jeep Willys MB. Or at least it's very likely that it was. This car had an inline 4 internal combustion engine and had about 60 to 65 horsepower. The design on this car is very innovative compared to the rest, but it's probably made like this because of World War II. Now going to the 1950s, we have the Volkswagen Beetle, and I can certainly see where this car got its name. This is by far the most creative design I've seen for a car in the hours I've spent researching for this video. The Volkswagen Beetle has a 4-cylinder air-cooled internal combustion engine. Wow, that's a long word. And it has about 25 to 30 horsepower. Something to note here is that for the cars, seatbelts were an optional equipment from the 1940s to the 1960s, but then they become common during the 1970s. So that's why you haven't seen seatbelts in the cars yet in this video. Enough about the 1950s, let's go to the 1960s. The 1960s has the Ford Mustang, and this car is very cool. I want to have one of these. The Ford Mustang quickly became popular, and it helped popularize the pony car class of vehicles. The Ford Mustang used a great variety of engines, including the inline-6 and V8 internal combustion engines. These engines allow the Ford Mustang to go from about 100 horsepower all the way up to about 300 horsepower. The design itself for this car is fantastic. I wish I could have keep going on with this car, but I have to go to the 1970s, in which they have the Volkswagen Golf. The Volkswagen Golf is praised for its innovative design, and this car seems like it can at least hold a family of 4. The Volkswagen Golf used a variety of engines, most commonly the 4-cylinder internal combustion engine, that allowed the Volkswagen Golf to have about 70 to 110 horsepower. A note here is that seatbelts are now becoming required during the 1970s, so from here on out, the cars have seatbelts. There's also another change happening at this time, and leaded gasoline is being phased out until the 70s and 80s, but it's now becoming replaced by the current gasoline that we have at this point in time. So now the next decade is the 1980s, and we have the Ford F-Series. The Ford F-Series was so popular during this time that it solidified Ford's position as a leader in the truck market. The design for this car looks great, at least to me. It looks simple, yet majestic. The Ford F-Series uses a variety of engines, most commonly the V6 and V8 internal combustion engines that allow the Ford F-Series to have about 100 to 210 horsepower. So now here we move on to the next decade, the 1990s, and here we move on from leaded gasoline, so RIP leaded gasoline. In the 1990s, we have one of 3 appearances of the Toyota Corolla. The Toyota Corolla uses a 4-cylinder internal combustion engine, and it has about 100 to 140 horsepower. Nothing against this car, but this car looks like the type of car that a person that gets bullied in Disney movies would have. They're like, oh no way, you have this car, and then you get bullied because of it. Personally, I don't think that material items make you important. I believe that your personality is what makes you important. So if you're not 6'3" with dreads and a Hellcat, then don't worry about it, because that's not what makes you special. What makes you special is the person that you are. For the next decade, we have the 2000s and the Toyota Prius. The Toyota Prius uses a hybrid engine, and to explain what a hybrid engine is it's an engine that has an internal combustion engine combined with the electric motor and batteries. This hybrid engine allows the Toyota Prius to have about 70 to 110 horsepower. For the design of the Toyota Prius, it has a modern looking design for cars, and it only keeps getting better from the next cars. So now with the second to last decade, we have the 2010s with the Toyota Corolla and its second appearance. This version of the Toyota Corolla improves on the design from the Toyota Prius, and you still see this car around to this day. At least I've seen it before. This version of the Toyota Corolla uses a 4-cylinder internal combustion engine. This engine allows this Toyota Corolla to have about 132 to 140 horsepower. So now to wrap the video up, we have the last decade. 2020s, and for this one, I'm just gonna use the most popular car of 2024, and that is yet again the Toyota Corolla final appearance. So, this version of the Toyota Corolla has about 169 horsepower and uses a 2-liter 4-cylinder internal combustion engine. The design for this Toyota Corolla is heavily improved on from the one in the 2010s, and I personally think this one looks better. So that is it for the poorly done evolution of cars. So if you like the video, consider liking and subscribing. That helps me a lot. And maybe another video that I make may interest you in the future. So enough about that. I hope you enjoy your day and stay safe.